So I feel that I need to say a disclaimer up front before we get too heavy into this video. If you are primarily a real estate photographer, please know that nothing I say in this video is meant to offend or upset you. In fact, now that I say this out loud, if you are semi-successful as a real estate photographer, I really don't think any of the harsh things I may say would even upset you, because honestly, if you're doing that well in real estate photography, this doesn't necessarily apply to you. And because this video is based on a question that I received in a previous Business of Architecture Photography Q&A, if you have a question that you'd like me to address in a future episode, feel free to leave it in the comments below and start it off with the words business question. In fact, I have a little surprise related to this video series of business Q&As, where I will be traveling to visit another photographer, where both of us will be able to address some of your questions. So again, if you have a question related to the business side of architecture photography, leave it in the comment section of this video and start it off with the term business question. The question I received related to this video was one I received in a comment from Alex, and Alex asks, can you talk a bit to the mindset shift you had to undergo and transition and comparison from real estate to architecture, in particular with regards to client expectations and image composition? How do you think differently now, going from shooting spaces wide in order to capture everything to composing tighter and deciding on what details and angles to focus on? Thanks again. Now, before I address this question specifically, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the Business of Architecture Photography video series that I did with photographer Mike Kelly. And within parts of several different videos within this series, I personally address a lot of details related to this topic because, as you may or may not know, I spent roughly, I'm gonna guess, about 4 years straight shooting primarily real estate listings. We also do a deep dive into subjects like pricing your photography, licensing, copyright, sales and marketing, building your website. The list goes on and on. To get more details on the Business of Architecture video series, feel free to check out the link in the description below. Okay, so mindset shift, going from real estate to A&D photography. Addressing the part where he was asking about client expectations and image composition, a major part of that has to do with how you market yourself. What types of images are people seeing when they visit your website? If they go to your website and they mostly see these wide, shoot in the corner real estate style photos, the type of client that you're going to attract are the clients who primarily want these big, wide, shoot from the corner style photos. But if you want to shoot for clients that appreciate tighter vignettes and detail shots, then put that on your website, because then that's the type of client you're going to attract. And clearly another major piece of this is conversing and interacting, communicating with your client on site prior to you sometimes even taking a single snapshot. Do a walkthrough of a project with your client and go slow. I mentioned this in one of the videos where I believe it was the 7 tips for shooting interior design photography. And a lot of those tips do carry over when working with architecture design firms, custom home builders, remodeling companies, things like that. But as I mentioned in that video, I think a big piece of advice I can give if you are going from real estate into A&D style photography is slow down. Most A&D type clients are not hiring you because of how fast you shoot. They are hiring you for the quality of work that they're going to get. And in the types of work that these clients are in, if they're producing quality work, they know too that it takes time. But I want to double back on something that Alex asked in the first sentence. He was asking, can you talk a bit about the mindset shift? And from my perspective and my point of view, I think this is where I see a lot of problems, a lot of questions, a lot of issues photographers have when wanting to transition from real estate photography over to A&D. And when outlining this video, I boiled it down to 4 main points. The first, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on, and the first kind of goes without saying, it's a different shooting style. If you think your shooting skills as a real estate photographer are going to translate 100% over to A&D, you're sorely mistaken. Yeah, there is some carryover, but emphasis on the word some. I'm not gonna go into a ton of details on this because I think another photographer made a YouTube video related to this and did a fantastic job at breaking this down. I'd refer you to Adam Taylor's video on YouTube where he also addresses some of the differences if you're wanting to transition from from real estate photography over to A&D. I love and appreciate the content that Adam is putting out there. In fact, I know Adam also watches and subscribes to this channel. So hi, Adam. Hey, don't forget to take out your phone and record your television on this part of the video and then post it to your Instagram story, okay? Let's move on to point number 2. A&D photography, as it relates to real estate photography, is a very different game. This is one of those realizations that you have to come to as it relates to your mindset. This is like knowing how to ice skate. Let's say you're excellent at ice skating and you have aspirations of being a competitive figure skater, and you do it for years, and eventually you become a well-known, reputable figure skater. But then one day you decide you want to transition your career over from figure skating to ice hockey. Of course, there's going to be some basics that will carry over, but there are so many aspects now that are completely different. Point number 3 is that as an A&D photographer, it carries, as I would say, more of a weighty responsibility. Now, I'm not saying that real estate photography isn't a weighty responsibility, it very much is. But compare the time and effort that your clients go into when setting up a shoot, say with real estate photography versus A&D photography. With real estate photography, your realtor and real estate clients, as well as the home sellers, they know that that property is going to need to be shot eventually, and most of the time, those are about the only 2 parties involved when setting up a shoot. But compare that to, say, setting up a shoot now for an architecture firm that's also involved with an interior design firm. In that scenario, you might have several parties involved for just one day's photo shoot. Not only do you have the architecture firm, you also have the interior designer who's possibly cost sharing on the project. If it's a residential project, now you need to coordinate with the homeowner. If it's commercial, you may need to coordinate the shoot with a, let's say, property manager, building owner, tenants, the list goes on there. Not to mention cleaners, stagers, just the list of people that could potentially be involved in A&D style shoots is quite immense, related to real estate photography. And I understand what I said about real estate does not apply with every single property and shoot, but I'm kind of averaging things out using general terms for the most part. But let's run a worst case scenario. Say in both situations, the client doesn't like your photos or anything else goes sideways, and for one reason or another, they don't want your end product and they now have to rehire another photographer and set up another shoot. Yes, doing that for a real estate listing is going to be a hassle, but in relation to all the moving pieces, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but I think that's going to be more of a hassle in the A&D photography situation. Let's move on to point number 4, and I think this is the point that's possibly going to ruffle some feathers. In A&D photography, there is a higher need to be perceived as a smart business person. Now, again, please do not misinterpret what I'm saying here. Stick with me for a second. I think you'll understand where I'm coming from. If you are an intelligent, successful real estate photographer, you have to admit that a good chunk of your competition is a bunch of doofuses. If you are wanting to jump into A&D photography, you have to know your rates and stick with them. You have to know how to communicate effectively with people. You have to know a good amount about licensing, and you probably have to create a pricing structure solely related to licensing. You have to know about cost sharing. You have to know at least some basics of copyright law, and you have to use contracts. And again, if you're in real estate, you know that some of the doofuses within real estate photography don't know these subjects and they're getting away with it, and they're actually doing okay. But if you want to transition your business over into architecture and design photography, you need to realize that your competition in your market who's been doing this even 2, 3, 5, 10 plus years, they already know these areas and topics through and through. I see more dumb, no-brainer business-related questions in real estate photography Facebook groups than I do in A&D photography related groups. And understandably so. The barrier of entry in real estate photography is relatively low. Clearly, nobody is going to know absolutely everything from the start, but jumping into any genre of photography as a business and then asking some of the basic fundamentals, it's just not an intelligent move. Yes, the argument could be made that experience is the best kind of education, but we're not talking about the minutiae and the details. of operating a photography business. Think of this scenario. Pretend there's someone who's an amazing cook and they have aspirations and desires to one day open up their own bar and grill restaurant. Eventually, they purchase an old property, they fix it up, they hire a staff. They're finally able to open the doors to their new restaurant, but on opening day, after a few hours of operation, they turn to their staff and they say, "Hey, who do we call if we're running low on vegetables? Hey, can someone help me understand the details of a liquor license? Do I even need one of those since we have a bar here in the restaurant?" Again, the point of this video is not meant to upset or offend anybody. In reality, to pull back the curtain, when I was outlining and kind of writing this video, I was honestly writing it to myself, a version of myself roughly 5 or 6 years ago when I was primarily shooting real estate. And when I hit a point where I was wanting to transition out of real estate and go for more A&D style clients, these are some of the things that I wish someone had told me, and in reality, I eventually had to learn, but I learned the hard way. Now, again, the point of this video is not meant to be a pitch, but if you are at that point where you are fairly fresh to A&D, architecture and design photography, or you're wanting to go from real estate into this style, I highly recommend checking out the Business of Architecture video series that I did with Mike Kelly. There is a ton of information in there, and some of the pointers, tips, advice, and guidance that myself and Mike Kelly give can put you leaps and bounds ahead of your competition who doesn't know some of these things. Well, that will do it for this video. If you got anything out of it, make sure to drop me one of these. You can follow me on Instagram. And again, if you have a business-related question that you'd like me to address in a future video, please drop it in the comments below and start it off with the 2 words, business question. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and we'll see you on the next video.